it's
I
true,
don't
right? Well, it's true, and somebody asked me do I read the news on a national level? And I said, of course I read the news. But what I do is I read a plethora of news. So I'll go and I'll read something in CBC, which is so left, it's crazy. And then I'll read something from the Post, which is more right. And then somewhere in the middle is the truth. And I think that's where we've really come into problems within our own media is that, we've polarized it to this to almost the same extent that is being in the US, maybe not as vitriol, but it's definitely the same concept. If I want to read out what's going on in the US, I have to read Fox, I have to read CNN, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. And I think that that's a statement on media, period, and that we've lost our way as an industry. And with that, you lose credibility. And the most important thing for a newspaper is to be credible. And I think, we talk about local media, and I think we work, in the crow's nest past because if I don't tell the truth, then I go to the grocery store and somebody's going to call me on it. I have to look at my readers in the face. And so it's a very personal level of the newspaper. There's no part in the newspaper where I have an opinion except for my editorial. And I have an opinion and I write it voraciously in my editorial because that's my job, is to give you my perspective on life. But the rest of the paper, Switzerland, in my newspaper, in fact, I've had articles written about me by my own reporter that weren't in the best light, but it was the right thing to do because I said it, or I did something, or I owned it, and it was written about. And so I think, I often say, for example, in Calgary, if you went into a district of Calgary, say you went into 17th Avenue, or you went into Inglewood, or you went into these communities, and you started up a little tiny newspaper in that geographic area, they'd probably do really well, because it would be read for people who have an interest in what's going on in their geographic area. Nobody's covering their kids' soccer games and their swimming meets and their races. And that's what community newspapers do. The problem that we're also now having in the country is that, and it's happening even with the big newspapers, is that they've become regionalized. And when you regionalize a newspaper, you've lost the flavor of what a newspaper is. And so you, in essence, have lost your newspaper. And the studies are really showing that when there's not a newspaper in a community, that it creates a vacuum, and people need knowledge. They need information. So they're going to get that information from somewhere. And 9 out of 10 times they're going to get it off social media, where there are no parameters, where it's all opinion based, where there's no reporters. You can't get sued. There's no fact checking. And so you're listening to somebody's opinion. And you're not only listening to opinion, but then you're geared towards an algorithm that tells you this is what you want to hear. So you're not hearing opposing sides. You're not critically thinking. You're not reading. You're not coming up with conclusions. And it really is like social media has dumbed down society in so many ways that we've really lost our ability to critically think. I even look at what's going on in the US right now with Charlie Kirk, and do I agree with Charlie Kirk with what he said? Absolutely not. But what is absolutely terrifying to me is that a 22-year-old kid who didn't have an ability to reason to the extent that an adult does came up with conclusions based on what? And my guess is that he wasn't reading a newspaper. He wasn't critically thinking. There was a whole bunch of issues going on there. And as a result, there's going to be ramifications to everybody, including him and his family and all of these things. And I think it all comes back to that generation not being able to critically think because they're just so ingrained in what's going on in social media that and they believe it. It's just absolutely mind-boggling to me, but it's because people need to fill a vacuum of space. And when your news isn't doing it, when your news has also lost their way, then it's like it's a slide down into nothingness. And that's really creates that chaos that we're seeing in the world right now. I think it 100% has to do with a lack of good media. It's social media. It's people not having the ability to have face-to-face conversations and debate, to sit around a table and have discussions. It's a myriad of issues. And I think that's why we're in the state of society that we're in right now.